All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to BeerNet Radio on the Wednesday Warehouse segment. We have here Jordan Driggers in the studio. Yo, Jordan.
Hey, yo.
And we have Jen Litz Kirk in our Austin office holding down the fort. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
Jennifer is high energy today. So
Are you? Yeah.
Let's start with you, Jennifer, because when we talk about high energy, you are the hardest working woman in the beer industry, and I am the least hardworking old man in the beer industry. So we make a good pair. Anyway, so what kind of news stories we've been working on this week that are hot, hot, hot?
This is so hot right now. I like that biscuit. She's so hot.
Oh, God.
Oh, God.
What does this voice do? Oh, that's cute.
What is this voice? Oh, Jennifer, this is
Yeah.
your God speaking to you.
No, that's the
one your
principal
mother always
voice.
warned you about.
And I am not. Please do not unplug me.
You know what? Enough with this nonsense. Okay. We'll just get down to business.
Let's get down to business. Yeah. Well, some of the biggest news I think this week was no news at all, right? There is no Columbia deal as per, Reuters, get your facts right. No, anyway, we had been hearing since the summer that there was a potential deal for Meritage, which of course has had Columbia for since 2012 to potentially unload them. And then Reuters came out with a story, I think it was Friday, saying, per sources that they were indeed shopping the distributor around, who we know personally does more than 80 million cases of beverage alc and non-alc a year, because Chris Stefanski has told us that as much on this pod. So anyway, supposedly it was at a rumored $2 billion. Morgan Stanley was working on the deal. So this came out, and then we contacted old Chris, who, thankfully told us the whole story. Of course, there was a little spark behind the smoke, as there sometimes is with these kinds of stories. So he says that Meritage does an audit of its business every 5 years or so, just to see what things are worth. So that was part of the process. Meanwhile, on the other side, they did get some interest in people buying, institutions, people, whatever, buying the distributorship. And so they thought, some of them were somewhat credible. So they thought, okay, well, we need to go ahead and vet this situation, right? Let's figure out what we're dealing with here. They did, in fact, hire Morgan Stanley. Ultimately Chris says, sorry?
Hence the leak.
Yeah. Hence the leak. Right. But of course, ultimately Chris says that, Meritage did some soul searching, right? The board met and they decide, we're trying to figure out, is it the right time to exit, whether the valuation was what they think it's worth and what the longer term prospects were. And long story short, anyone who's read the story knows, they're in fact, per Chris, keeping the investment. They think that what Columbia has built is a total total beverage distributor, not just bev-alc, but beverage distributor, is a great model. And this is a quote from Chris. He says, we built a model we think could absolutely strategically align with our bigger suppliers, probably better than almost any other distributor in the country. And he also says, not only does Meritage want to hold on to the business, but we believe there's an opportunity for them to start investing differently, potentially in the quote M&A opportunities that we believe are going to come, that we'll have the opportunity to take advantage of over the next couple of years. I think it's going to be a good opportunity to continue to build the model they've built in other parts of the country. So very interesting non-news news.
Well, from my perspective, I have two observations. I had heard that rumor, and actually I'd heard that Reyes was the one that was kicking the tires, although they're saying that institutional, family offices, but at this point, Reyes is a family office. Number two, I was a little bit surprised because the founder passed away in the spring.
Jim.
What was his name?
Jim Simon.
Right. The genius that he basically invented quant trading, which is just, using algorithms to trade, which now, a lot of firms do. Jane Street, all the big firms, have a quant. Yeah. And so he made a lot of money and he passed away. And however, where else are you going to put your money? So let's say you do sell Columbia for, I don't know, over $1 billion. There are just not a lot of investments out there that can guarantee a return like a beer distributor can.
Mhm.
And that's, you know, if you think, oh, it's a lot of money because beer distributors are trading so high, you know, that may be a reason why you'd look, because they are trading at just insane multiples, especially after Silver Eagle San Antonio. But on the other hand, you know, were you going to put your money in NVIDIA?
Right.
I mean, it seems kind of late for that, or, you know, so
Or an NFL team now, right?
yeah, right. I mean, seriously, probably an NFL team. That seems, I mean, so where else would you put your money? I think having a beer distributor in the Pacific Northwest is a pretty good investment in itself.
Yeah,
Right.
Ben and I were talking about that yesterday. Is like, who can afford 2 billion plus anymore? And that was the struggle the NFL had, is because they wanted actual people owning the team. And
Mhm.
now there's only like 40 people in the United States that can afford an NFL team. So they opened it up to private equity. That's a pretty good investment, sort of like a beer distributorship. But I would ask Harry, with Redwood kind of not going after Silver Eagle, not going after House of La Rose, do you think that they're kind of being told not to pursue, or their money got messed up after last year and are a little more hesitant?
Right. Well, you can look at that two ways. One is, you would think the AB distributors would be a little bit cheaper now because their volumes are down.
Mhm.
Although, if you look at what Silver Eagle went for, rumored in San Antonio, that doesn't seem to have affected them. Of course, they did have Constellation, and
Yeah.
they have Mike's, and a lot of growing brands. I don't know. I think Redwood probably did bid for San Antonio, and the price just got too rich. I had been hearing that Redwood was sniffing around like 2 years ago in San Antonio, because they already own Houston, and they're used to dealing with John now.
Mm.
So all roads pointed to Redwood, but then the Mitchells came in at the last moment. I don't know if that was a brewery thing where the brewery preferred the Mitchells because Mitchells, have been active on the wholesaler panel and they're tight in with AB, or if they just outbid them. So with the Bass brothers backing. Now, as far as like what was
Ohio House of La Rose.
yeah. As far as House of La Rose, I don't know. You would think, since they already have Heidelberg, that they would just go ahead and pick that up. And so I don't know if that again is the brewery not wanting private family offices to get too big, and guiding. They have ways of guiding the deal toward others. One way is to say, hey, we're not going to approve you if you don't do it this way, or do a match and snatch. And so, yeah, it's hard to know without getting into the private conversations of what actually happened, but it is kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, it was surprising. Yeah. Maybe they're saving their powder for something else. So,
yeah. And, honestly, it's not a great time to buy if you're going to leverage the deal, which that's how you get better returns, is you leverage it up with debt. But with interest rates so high, leveraging it up the return is not as attractive. So obviously, I don't want to get in another fight with Lester Jones, but I'm pretty sure the Fed is going to take at least a half a point in the fall, and maybe more. We are in a recession. That's why they're taking it. No, I think we're both right. Okay, but yeah, that's my exposition on all that. Surprising, but kind of not.
Yeah. Well,
and I will, I do feel for you, Jen. Late August, early September, nothing happens.
it's, we've had actually, and that's usually true, but we've had a lot of intraday breaking news here and there with the House of La Rose thing last week. There was something, obviously Jenkins bought them. There was something else. I mean, it was,
Mark Anthony.
yeah, Mark Anthony, the David Barnett, obviously moving up to president, who will have speaking at the summit. So buy your tickets, because the 30th is the last day for early bird. Anyway, so actually it hasn't been as quiet as normal. And part of that, I think, is to your point, saying that the AB distributors maybe aren't as valued as they should be after last year's event. But I think buyers and sellers are starting to come to agreements. So I think you're going to see maybe more of that pent up action. Yeah. All right. So we also did a little story on Breakthrough, which you guys may have seen, which Jordan and I kind of batted this back and forth. They are a top 3 Bev-alc distributor in the country. Of course, they have wine and spirits, and we thought, wow, that's bigger than we thought they were. But I digress. You know, for beer, they have Molson Coors, Boston Beer, Heineken, Mark Anthony, Constellation, Athletic, Yingling in some markets. They're in 16 states. Anyway, kind of flying in the face of what Lester's been saying, we talked to their VP sales for beer, Shane Cahill, and I mean, he was talking about consumers are watching their disposable income really closely, you know, and so he recommends this going back to old school ways of doing things, you know, proper point of sale, ad rotation, displays, features, but you know, for them, like it's the value driven brands gaining share in the on premise, your Miller High Life, your Montucky cold snacks, interesting. Because obviously, you know, that may be aligned to different networks. And I think the whole deal kind of favors Breakthrough getting them. But anyway, that's just my aside. And Coors Original, you know, they're seeing that Athletic has been a, quote, highly strategic partner for them. So that's interesting. You know, same old segment showing growth for them, imports and non-alc, even ciders in some cases. Craft is still tough. But, you know, even though there are some premium brands growing for them, they're looking to be super strategic with price and that sort of thing. So it can also be true that, fine, the economy can be great or not. Those things can be mutually exclusive from what consumers perceive, right? They can be tightening their belt regardless of whether or not there is actually a recession or not. So I just thought that was kind of worth highlighting.
The fact that C-stores have hit a wall, like, I mean, this time last year, all the growth in the beer industry was coming from C-stores. Mm-hmm. And it's just not true anymore. And, you know, that to me is the consumer telling the CPG industry that we don't have the spending power. They have to buy gas, you know, they have to buy diapers, they have to buy toilet, you know, there's certain things that you have to buy. Jordan, you have to buy diapers. I know. Mm-hmm. You're getting ready to load up. And so, you know, what's left over for beer? Mm-hmm. Where the C-store goes, the economy goes. I'm a believer in that.
Well, I mean, for beer all around, it's been just kind of a tough stretch over this last part of summer. It's a good thing football and Labor Day are coming up because beer needs it. For the past 6 weeks, they've been trailing wine and spirits trends and just moving really slow. And now, if you look at scans, like you don't even really have to be growing to be gaining share. Case in point, Bud Light is actually gaining some share in food. But I mean, just to see any sort of positive number next to Bud Light, I think is a good sign for AB and their distributors. And you look at Constellation, and they're hardly growing right now over the latest 4 weeks. So everything's moving a little slow, and it's kind of up for grabs on share. You don't have to be gaining. You don't have to be setting the world on fire right now. But going back to Bud Light, I think the other bit of big news is they're finally kind of going out on a limb with their marketing and letting Shane Gillis, who's kind of a very popular but polarizing figure, take the wheel, starring in it, writing it, and pushing that on college football, which, you know, they've always been pretty much laser focused on NFL. I know they've always done some stuff with college football, but it seems like most of the spend is towards NFL. So I think that's kind of going back to what you always say, Harry, like after the backlash of the Bush family just saying, I want this, I don't care what it is, just we're going to market on everything. And so that's what they're doing. I think it could be the start of something positive for that brand. Yep. Although some readers have emailed and say that they need to do even more questionable stuff, like
They-
bikini
we-
washes to cater to the manly men.
Wet t-shirt contests, I
Yeah.
believe, was
Let's go
the
full on
exact
back
thing.
to the 80s
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
and
No,
the 90s. Elvira, Mistress of the Dark.
That would be actually, I would enjoy that. And comedians can thread that needle, better than anybody else can. So it's a good move there. It's also a good move because, as you mentioned, he co-wrote it. So like, if you say this is crap, you're not rallying against AB, you're rallying against Shane Gillis, right? So it's a nice circumventing there as well. I think it's I think it's pretty good. I think it's a good commercial, and I think it's a good way forward.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good play for AB. All right, so what else?
We just had something come through right now that we're going to publish for tomorrow. Just Reyes is getting buzz balls in California, Illinois, Indiana, and South Carolina. So that's interesting. I mean, that's not, we expected as much basically, but that's here, with these guys going in the beer network. And then, earlier this summer, there was an announcement that Monaco Cocktails would go with a cluster in the Midwest that included Reyes. So just obviously continuation of a trend.
Yep.
Yingling also going to
right.
Illinois. Can you imagine?
Right.
I couldn't believe that they're going to go with the Molson Coors network, and there's 14 wholesalers in that state. 14 Molson Coors wholesalers. And so we talk about consolidation in the middle tier, but there's still quite a few out there.
Illinois is the home of Miller Lite, and
Nobody's giving that up.
Nobody's going to give it up. They're just going to hold on to those forever. And I think it's not that surprising. I mean, they're in partnership with Molson Coors. It would be such a slap in the face to go with the network, especially in their home market of Chicago. Yeah. So I think that had something to do with it. And plus they're good distributors because they have high share. They have that Miller Lite. They got the juice, man. They got the juice. You know what they have? They have the juice. And the juice don't lie. I'm kind of liking this button. All right. Enough of that nonsense. I'm trying to think of what I worked on.
Your tan?
Jen, where's the squirt bottle? Dang it. My tan.
You've been on your Logan Paul kick.
Oh, yes, that's true. That's true.
How is that? Oh, you mean with Congo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they get sued every week.
Yeah.
So layup. There's nothing going on. Yeah, just all I have to do is go and see who's suing him this week, and I have an instant story. Logan Paul.
Today on BeerNet Radio, we have Jon Springer, senior reporter at Ad Age, where he covers beverages and sports. But that's not his only claim to fame. He's also directed reporting at leading trade pubs covering U.S. food retail, Penton and Winsight. He's also authored the book Once Upon a Team about the epic rise and historic fall of baseball's Wilmington Quicksteps, which I actually have a copy of. So welcome, Jon.
One of the few.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I want to get to that in a little bit, but like Harry mentioned, we talk periodically because you cover beverages, some of the biggest stories in beverages and BevAlc for Ad Age, and you come to us a lot for insights. But I have to tell you, a lot of times I'm thinking, well, I wonder what Jon thinks because he's the expert in this situation, right? And so, at risk of asking the most obvious question off the bat, I'm curious, like some of the biggest BevAlc marketing stories you've covered over the last few years, which ones fascinated you the most, or which ones did you feel particularly strong about?
Yeah, my answer is going to be a little bit weird. It's covering Bud Light, but it was before the Mulvaney experience.
Okay.
Bud Light in 8 months before this all went down, did an agency review. And those kinds of events give us opportunity to kind of look into the brand, who's going to win. There's a lot of intrigue in the industry about sort of that is going on. And then what is the incoming agency going to be dealing with? And we dealt, it was a fascinating story from almost every angle because Bud Light was such a famous brand for its advertising. However, right, as you guys well know, right, it's had a long losing streak as far as sales go. And so, how is this all going to work? And so I talked to a number of, advertising people and analysts and, all that, got a very good picture of sort of what happened with Bud Light. Published that, and it seemed like maybe a few weeks later, the Mulvaney story went down, and it's kind of sent everything in a different direction.
So you were kind of connecting the dots there, right? Like, I wonder if they hadn't gone with this agency, would this have happened, or just the rigmarole of the whole?
Yeah, well, it did. I mean, it kind of it all kind of connected, right? Because the new agencies were the ones and behind their move to sort of change their advertising strategy a little bit, as they did earlier that year. And I think inadvertently, basically, things happened so that things blew up on them. But they definitely changed their point of view, their tone of voice a little bit, and their point of view with advertising early that year. That represented something new for them, and it was really something they were searching for. My story talked about how the brand name was diluted between so many associated products with the seltzers and the gelatas and whatever, all that stuff. And so they kind of I don't want to say that they listened to what I said, but
Sure.
But part of what they did was kind of divided up the brand extensions from the main brand, and a lot of those things kind of came through, and just then, and like I said, it just kind of tipped the frisbee and it went flying in a different direction once the Mulvaney thing went down.
Yeah,
because it was very. I mean, they spoke at our summit in January of that year, and we noted how, wow, they're taking a different direction for Bud Light, and I think everybody was kind of excited. Like, I think they were finding their footing finally. That's what's so ironic about all this, is that, as far as like distributors are concerned, everybody was kind of on board with, okay, finally, we're going to get some focus back on the core Bud Light brand and bring it back to life. And then, like you said, it just kind of went off the handle there.
No, absolutely. And we got a chance to sort of revisit a lot of their old advertising, some of the stuff that was, really well received, but didn't move the needle on sales, like Dilly Dilly, for example. And some of the stuff going back even further than that, when, it sort of established itself as a separate entity from Budweiser and how they done that. And there was some opinion out there that, the style of humor that Bud Light had done for so many years just wasn't funny anymore. And I think that kind of contributed to the brand taking a little bit of a different tone of voice back in the beginning in 23.
Yeah. Did you see the new Shane Gillis college football spots by chance? What do you think? I mean, that kind of seems like a throwback to some of the older, like 80s or 90s commercials, like Simple Humor, right? What any opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I thought about was sort of Yes, I Am, this idea of the guy who will do anything to get a Bud Light, which is sort of like at the heart of that ad. That ad was written by Shane Gillis and through his production company, so maybe a little bit different, maybe point of view than the typical Bud Light ads we've seen this year, but definitely throwing it back to humor again. And they've been gradually sort of increasing the laughs, I think, in the ads that they've gone on this year.
Yeah, one more from me, and then I'll kick it over to my other guys. But I'm curious who you think in BevAlc is getting their media strategy right, in your opinion, right, and how?
Yeah, I thought about this question. It's a tough one to sort of answer because I'm only so close to sort of those decisions. But it seems like, look, the big brands, have great media agencies, and you would think that they were doing it right. They're putting their money behind football. They're putting the money, in sort of the big media opportunities. There's, I guess some of the other things we think about is, how are you going to reach the younger, legal age drinker? And I know that some of the avenues to them are a little bit problematic. For instance, TikTok, I don't think allows any beer advertising. So you got to be real careful with that. But I think that's something that they must be thinking about now. And sort of other, they've done quite a bit with music. And I guess that makes sense too, right? Big properties that a lot of people see. That's that's not a great answer, but that's sort of where I kind of see it.
Picking up there, I'd like to play a little hypothetical. And if you were CMO or brand director of, let's just say, a light beer brand, where would you put your money? What properties, platforms, or sports would you get into that at all?
Yeah, I think I answered the same thing. I'd probably look at sports and big properties like music. You've got to sort of get it in front of a lot of people, right? And the right sort of the right ages of people and all that stuff. And there's so few, you know, big monocultural properties out there anymore that it's difficult to kind of have a successful strategy without sort of hitting some of those things. And so what we're seeing, but I don't have to tell you this, but the big beer companies are almost really intentional about sort of where they're putting their money and the platforms that they're behind. And to the extent that they're not in other things, they're only in the certain things they're in.
Yeah, I mean, live sports is the only thing left on TV that's consistently you get a return on, I think, because it's the only thing where people actually watch the commercials.
Yeah.
At least on TV,
So from your view, and this is kind of a debate or, something that people have been talking about more and more, is there a category problem with beer, or do you think there is a brand problem, or both?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that you guys have chronicled, there are sort of challenges to the category from a lot of things. I think it's interesting that, craft beer I don't want to say got killed, but is certainly less of a threat than it once was, but it still hasn't made it easy for the mainstream beers. So I think there is a little bit of and the non-alcohol movement as well, the CBD drinks or what have you that are coming in, are all sort of challenging beer, and then of course the vodka seltzers and all those brands that have come in that have all kind of combined to do cause some problems for beer companies. So I think that's sort of one of the issues, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm curious, the Dylan Mulvaney thing was a huge deal, obviously, in the beer industry. To what extent has that bled over to how all other marketers view their campaigns? I mean, it seems like it's had an effect across all advertising. Is that true?
Yeah. There's definitely. I think that came out this morning that Ford was cutting back on its DEI. There's been other companies that have sort of
Jack Daniels. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of cut back on those things. I don't know. You can draw a straight line from one to the other, but Bud Light was unique in that it was sort of the ground zero of sort of this anti-corporate wokeism movement that arose at that time, and they were really bloodied by it. But I think since then, I think there's been arguments against sort of being too politically involved for brands even before George Floyd and sort of those kinds of things happened. So some of it is kind of coming home to roost, I suppose. But it definitely showed what could happen.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? You mentioned a tiny bit ago CBD drinks, just to shift gears a little bit. And I'm curious, obviously you covered retail before you covered sports and beverages, but in general, do you find it harder to predict trends these days? Because obviously as journalists, we always have to do trend pieces, right? Is it harder to predict trends these days than it was, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I don't even try to predict. It's better. It's better to do it that way and just kind of see sort of what arises. But I would say I don't know if it's harder than it used to be or not. I mean, you can see some things coming, right? You like the non-alcohol thing, you could kind of see that coming. The CBD drink thing, it seems like that's coming. I'm not sure how big it'll get, but it'll get bigger. some of those things are obvious. I don't know how much kind of takes you by surprise. Are there things in the beer industry that have sort of kind of come up that have been unexpected?
Yeah, I would say that the
D9.
rise of full calorie, not just full calorie, but over caloried. Everybody talks about health and wellness as being the overall trend, but what then explain to me twisted tea, which is just a sugar bomb, and and some of these other brands that they're not health and wellness at all. And I think there's a real bifurcation in the market where people definitely are mindful of health and wellness, but they definitely want their indulgences too.
Yeah, that's on the extremes, right? Indulgences and on the other hand, being health conscious. On the ends, on the extremes.
Right.
Yeah,
For me, it's D9.
They're gonna drink their athletic, on a Wednesday, but come Friday, it's tequila shots downed with twisted tea back and then a chocolate cake.
Oof, God.
That's what you do, Jordan.
Yeah, and a buzz ball before I even get started.
Right. Yeah. Just hopefully you're taking Ubers when you do this, Jordan. Remember, your Business Daily on your American Express card, we never chastise for Uber expenses.
Oh, no.
No.
Never,
And Jen,
never.
I just, maybe you didn't realize that doesn't apply to Uber Eats. I don't know if you've.
Did I not switch my card over again? Oops.
I'm kidding. It's fine.
I am guilty of doing that once or twice.
Yeah.
No, that's funny.
okay.
Well, for me, the one I wouldn't have seen coming is the D9 beverages. Like, I never would have predicted that in particular to get as big as it's gotten. You've covered that a tiny bit, right, John? Or
Only a tiny bit. Yeah, I'm still trying to get my arms around sort of what's the right, marketing story about that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess there hasn't been a ton of marketing around it because people are still kind of tiptoeing around it. But anyway, apparently it sells itself. Let me talk about, because you've covered retail, and I wanted to ask you about that. You covered retail from a trade pub space, kind of doing what we do on the beer side. So I'm curious, I'm sure you followed some of these mega mergers like Kroger, Albertsons. There's rumors about a 7-Eleven deal, maybe that's a ways off. But just curious, what are your thoughts on that? Obviously, it'll probably affect the way beer is sold, right? What are your thoughts?
I guess it could, yeah. Albertsons and Kroger together would be a pretty formidable entity as far as buying power goes and all that. And they're trying to track down Walmart in sort of that category and get their costs down. So I would imagine that for suppliers dealing with a combined Kroger Albertsons would be more like dealing with Walmart than it is currently. I don't know how much more would necessarily change. I don't follow that industry as closely, obviously, as I used to. But that's certainly an interesting combination. One of the things that it might do is, at least I'd ask this question, is the effect on organized labor. Their retailers are two of the
biggest
most
employers.
prominent union shops left, and the unions always could use them against one another to sort of negotiate, and they wouldn't be able to do that quite as effectively anymore under this combination. But I'm sure from the retailer standpoint, they're looking at things like competing with Walmart in terms of cost. So, so that would be, obvious effect of that.
I think the FTC has to really walk a fine line, because the overall, from a political standpoint, it's about food pricing, right? It's about getting food pricing down. Does a merger of the two of among the largest grocers, does that make them more monopolistic that they can increase pricing, or does it give them more leverage like Walmart has against suppliers so that they can match Walmart better in pricing and actually bring down pricing? And then you have what you talked about, John, the labor issue. So I don't know the answer to that, because it could go either way. I think usually if we look at what's happened in the beer industry when the number 2 and 3 got together, beer pricing went up and has gone up more than inflation ever since 2008 when that happened. It wasn't that they could get better grain pricing so that they could go lower than AB. That's not what happened. But on the other hand, food retailing is a lot more competitive than the beer industry per se, the wholesale beer industry. So I'm not a lawyer, but Lena Khan's got her work cut out for her. Let's put it that way.
Low prices sell food, so that's an advantage that Walmart has on these guys. Just specific to Kroger and Albertsons, I think generally Kroger's had better pricing than Albertsons, so there would be some pressure for Kroger to sort of invest in the pricing proposition at Albertsons stores in order to sort of make it a normal thing. But it all remains to be seen. It'll definitely reduce competition in a lot of places, and that's what the FTC is concerned about. That effect in rising prices.
Right. If it ends up in fewer overall stores, then you've got Dollar General moving in, which I don't know if you've shopped at a Dollar General lately, Jordan, but I have one right here next to my house, so I go there all the time, but there aren't any options for produce. There aren't any vegetables. There aren't any fresh fruits. Not that I eat any of that crap, which is why I shop there, but it's not a healthy place to shop. Let me put it that way. There is nothing in Dollar General that screams health food, unless you want the fried jalapeno poppers.
Yeah.
Can be,
I think you can get that and hot dogs.
Right. I mean, they'll keep you alive. They'll keep you alive, but just not for long.
I think they sell plastic fruit, so
Yeah.
for the vibes. But all right. Well, hey, I want to ask about this book, right? Once Upon a Team. So curious, obviously you love baseball. When did you fall in love with baseball, and what led you to write the book?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of baseball fans, so I didn't have much choice. The older brother and my dad, were big Mets fans, and so I grew up a Mets fan. That particular book I was reading about baseball history. I'm reading a biography of John Montgomery Ward, who was a famous 19th century ball player. And it gave mention to a team from Wilmington, Delaware, that was calling itself the best, I forget, the championship amateur 9 of the United States or something like that. And I had lived in Wilmington for a little while before then, and I never knew that had been a thing. And so I kind of just got interested in that question: who was this team called the Quicksteps, who were the champions of amateur baseball or whatever? And little by little, I sort of uncovered the story, which was, they were a minor league team that by 1884 was very successful, and due to a lot of reasons. But there were 3 major leagues in 1884. One of the teams in the leagues in Philadelphia sort of dropped out, and in order to fulfill the schedule, they promoted this Wilmington team into the major leagues, so to speak, the Union Association. The team, the stadium, everything. They just took over the schedule for the disbanded team, and once they did that, they left behind a feudal record. But it wasn't because the team was bad. It was because of a labor situation with baseball at the time, of the reserve clause and all these things that took 100 years to solve. So there were players that jumped to other teams once this sort of thing went down. It's a little long story, but it's a story that it sort of played out itself in baseball with the Federal League and the teens, and the threat of the Continental League in the 60s, which gave rise to the Mets and the Astros. Those kinds of things played over again and again. Sort of uprising in or sort of an abundance of baseball leading to consolidation and that kind of thing. So anyway, that was the story. Rising salaries too. That was the thing. And a fun story. There's a lot of things that happen to Wilmington once they get into the big leagues. There's an umpire who's hit by a batted ball and nearly dies on the field. There's the players. There was a lot of drinking at the time, and back in those team actually had some good drinkers on it.
I'm shocked to learn this.
Yes. So
No way.
In a turn of the century baseball team, they were out there drinking as they played. Next thing you tell me they were chewing tobacco too.
Yeah, it was more whiskey, I think, than beer at that time. But yeah. One reserve catcher steps into a empty elevator shaft and falls down, hurts his back. He's out for the year.
Oh,
those kinds of stories like that. So
Crazy.
that's the story of Once Upon a Teen.
Nice. Very
That's
cool.
great.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Baseball is so that is a rich quarry. There is an endless amount of baseball stories, I feel like, and it is such a, all the Babe Ruth stuff and the my dad gave me a Leo DeRocha signed baseball when I was a kid, and I didn't know that it was valuable, and I just played with it like out in the yard and stuff. And then the signature got worn off, and my dad was furious. He was like, You did what? I got that signed by Leo DeRocher, who was a famous baseball player back then in the 60s. But
Yeah.
good stuff.
Mom
stuff.
threw your cards away. That's the
Yeah.
other story. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, Jon, thank you so much for being on BeerNet Radio. We really appreciate it. We love your work at Ad Age. Be sure and check out Jon's work in Ad Age and pick up his book. And, we'll just see you down the line, hopefully.
Okay. Jen, Harry,
All
thanks
right.
very much. Had a great time.
You bet. Take
Cheers.
care.
Thanks, Jon.
Bye now.